The New York Times Youth Forum is on the air. Youth of today, voting citizens of tomorrow. The New York Times, in cooperation with the DuMont Broadcasting Corporation, takes pleasure in presenting its youth forums, in which students meet to exchange ideas on vital issues in the news. Today, the students will discuss, are we giving bright students a fair chance? We have as our adult guest, William Benton, publisher, Encyclopedia Britannica. As usual, Dorothy Gordon, founder of Youth Forums and moderator of Forums for the Times, will direct the discussion. Now, here is Miss Gordon.
Thank you, and greetings, everybody. Today, we brought together a cross-section of young people to discuss and consider a very important question. Important for us, the adults, and important for them and their future. The question is, are we giving our bright students a fair chance? We have an adult guest, as usual, whom I shall introduce in a moment, but first we'll ask the panel members to introduce themselves. And John, will you start?
My name's John Swinburne. My age is 16, and I attend William Cullen Bryant High School in Queens.
I'm Margaret Morgan Roth. I'm 16 years old, and I attend Midwood High School in Brooklyn.
I'm Frank Scaglione. I'm from Jersey City. I'm a senior in Dickinson High School.
I'm Teresa Coyne. I attend the Sacred Heart of Mary Academy in the Bronx, and I'm 17.
I'm Joseph Brickhouse. I'm 16. I attend Charles Evans Hughes High School in New York.
Well, that's our panel. Our guest, former senator from Connecticut, has had a varied career as an educator, a businessman, and a statesman. Having visited the Soviet Union in 1955, he came back to the States, to America, determined to alert the leaders of America and the American people to the challenge that was facing them in the emphasis on science and technological education in the Soviet Union. And I know he's intensely interested in our question today and in the discussion with the young people. It gives me great pleasure indeed to introduce the president and chairman of the Encyclopedia Britannica, Senator William Benton. Senator Benton, do you want to hear what the young people think about this question of whether they are getting a fair chance or not?
I think if these are bright young people, we ought to hear from them. Did you select them, Miss Gordon, because they're especially bright?
I didn't select them. As a matter of fact, they were sent by the schools, and I haven't the slightest idea whether they are bright or are not bright because we only met for a few minutes a short time ago.
Well, let's hear from them. Maybe we could decide whether they're bright after we've heard from them.
Let's start right into the question. Do you young people feel that the bright students, and let's take the question from an overall, the nation as a whole, the whole idea of the question, whether our bright students are getting a fair chance. Who wants to start the ball rolling? All right, Margaret?
Well, I think that if we speak on our own plane, talking about high schools in big cities like New York and perhaps Chicago and perhaps San Francisco, we can say that they are beginning to do things for the bright child. But when we go out to smaller areas in the Midwest, places where people like David Reisman has been doing work, we find that the smaller schools there where they don't have the facilities of PTA and the interest that we have and the funds that we have in the larger cities, they are not doing as much.
All right, let's hear from the others. Joseph?
No, I say no because I think the educational system of today is based on for the mediocre or average student, whereas the teacher spends more time in disciplining the student and doing things down to the average student, that the bright student just sits in class and does not do any work.
Teresa?
Well, I think that, speaking generally, that the co-education of various groups of different learning abilities together definitely does not give the bright student the chance he needs to develop himself. Because since the aim of American education is, or should be, to develop each group to the point where each can make its own special contribution to society as a whole, then keeping the bright student on an educational level which fails to hold his interest or may even retard his development is definitely unfair.
Well, do you want to wait, Senator Benton?
I think they sound very bright.
You're dying to come into it, but just wait a minute. There are two more we haven't heard from. Let me, Frank. Yes.
Well, in general, I think that the bright student is definitely retarded in today's school system. The bright student, as Teresa said, is put into classes with the average student. Therefore, he feels that he doesn't have to do better than they, and, well, he just does a mediocre type of work. Whereas if the school systems were to separate the bright child from the average children and put them in various classes according to their ability to learn and their different interests in their particular fields, I think then we can say that we would contribute to education and perhaps even go greater than the Russians in developing scientists and men with technical knowledge.
Let's hear from John and then Senator Benton, and you may want to ask them questions as well as saying things of your own. All right,
I definitely agree with the rest of the panelists. I'd like to know, how can you give the better student a fair break when you stick him in a homogeneous grouping? Just as sticking him with kids below his ability will retard him. So I'll pass and let them...
well, before we bring Senator Benton in, I'm going to ask you a question because it occurred to me as I heard the other speakers, and that is, you say it will retard him. What about the possibility of the bright student affecting the average or the lower group and stimulate the others? Oh, the look on your face, come on.
I see the point. This is one of the arguments put up by many proponents of homogeneous grouping. Although, all right, perhaps the poorer students are sparked by the better students. But you're also losing the potential of these good students, which we need. We have to have them. Also, perhaps in this day and age of where the intellectual is looked down upon, that this will just spark a jealousy among the poorer students and have them rebel against this bright boy.
Senator Benton, I think you must know. Go on.
Well, Miss Gordon, I'd like to hit this from a somewhat different angle from these young people. Only about 1 out of 3 of our so-called bright students in high school get through college today in the United States. Dean Cole of Columbia has arbitrarily classified the top 20% of our high school classes as the bright students. Something like 60,000 of these bright students drop out of high school every year in the United States, and at least 200,000 of them don't have the chance to go to college at all, perhaps half of this number because they can't afford it. Now, one thing that we ought to be doing to give a better chance, and I think a fair chance, to our bright students is to give them a scholarship, the good ones, on a merit basis so they can go through college. You spoke of my trip to Russia, Miss Gordon. The Russians, of course, go at this exactly the opposite way. They prod, persuade, induce every bright boy and girl to go on through college. Indeed, they pay him to do it. They give him a pay roughly half that given to a worker in a Russian factory. And if he continues his high record at the college or university level, they make him a highly paid teacher or a great scientist or research engineer. Indeed, they treat their bright students much the way we treat our corporation presidents. I think, therefore, that the first and immediate step to improve the situation about which these young people are talking today is a great scholarship program to prevent this tragic leakage today out of our educational system of many of our brightest boys and girls.
Well, let's move from there. Our hands are flying up. Yes, Margaret.
Well, I'm sure we all agree with the senator, but I would just like to make the point that the business of making scholarships on merit, it also must be on need. And one of the greatest problems, as you said, Senator, is a larger scholarship program, but one also that takes into account the rising cost of living and the fact that a family which used to be able to get a scholarship on perhaps $10,000, on perhaps $7,000, it can no longer even manage to exist on $7,000. In other words, it can't afford to send a child to school on $7,000. Between $7,000 and $10,000, it must have a great deal more scholarship aid than is being given to that individual group in society.
Teresa? You were nodding your head. Oh, I was going to say something. Did you want to answer that, Senator Benton?
Well,
Joseph's hands up.
I agree. I have nothing but agreement with Margaret on that. On the other hand, there is very great resistance throughout our society to a great program of scholarships. This would have to be done at the federal level, and many people resist and object to the idea of the federal government putting up this scholarship money. May I say, Miss Gordon, I'd like the views of these young people as to whether our high schools are fair to students in general. I think that our high school curriculum, by and large, has been disintegrating in recent years. Perhaps this is somewhat pointed up in my mind by my trip to Russia.
Yes.
I found on that trip that Russian boys and girls of this age, by this time, will have studied mathematics through trigonometry, all of them. They will have had 4 years of physics and 5 years of chemistry, all of them. 6 years of a modern language, all of them.
Well, you emphasize
Now,
when you say all of them.
Well, this is compulsory for Russian boys and girls. Now, President Griswold of Yale, I defer to the president of my greatest university in my state, in his recent book, gave an incident of a young high school student applying for admission to Yale, who in his 12 credits of his last 2 years in high school had 2 years of English, 1 year of American history. And let me read you these other courses, and I'd like to hear what these young people are studying. The others were as follows: typing, speech, chorus, 2 courses; physical education, 2 courses; journalism, personality problems, these are credit courses; and marriage and the family. Now, I submit that none of our students are getting a fair break if they're being exposed to curriculums of which this is remotely a typical sample.
Well,
let's hear what these young people are studying.
Does the fault lie with the selective system, selecting courses, or, well, all right, go ahead. Yes.
Benson, I definitely agree with you about scholarships. A national scholarship program would be a wonderful thing if the government could sponsor such a thing. But besides that, and also
would you give a scholarship
to
a boy who's been trained like this?
Yes, go back into that.
I mean, would you give this boy a scholarship with this kind of training? Or would you give your, you know, Aristotle said that learning is accompanied by pain. Would you give the scholarship to the boy who has studied his physics, chemistry, mathematics, and the other solid subjects that make for exact knowledge?
Well, also the big question in that, which you implied, is the curriculum, are they being subjected to these different subjects and so forth? Go ahead, Frank.
Yes, well, what I was going to say is that I think the need in today's high schools is for technical advice. I don't think the average high school pupil has enough advice in the type of courses to take. And I think the average pupil gets into high school with the opinion that he's forced to go to school until he's 16. And even if the student has the slightest inkling of learning further and going to college, he just drags himself along at a slow rate and takes any course that's handed to him. Therefore, after his 4 years, so he looks at what he has and he says, now what college could I go to? And many times he can't go to any college. It's not the fault.
And if he hasn't taken his mathematics, he can't go into any field of science.
Right.
All the fields of science are barred to him.
Yes, Margaret.
Well, there we get into the problems of education.
Yes.
The teacher shortage and the fact that when you have overcrowding 5,000 students in one high school, you can't expect the kind of guidance that Frank has so rightly indicated we need. But in many of the schools that I'm acquainted with, what they try to do is give elective courses that will be more difficult, more stimulating to the bright child to push them onward. For instance, the honor courses in chem and physics, the college courses in English and math, the advanced French courses. In fact, in a number of schools I'm familiar with, they give courses on the college level which prepare these students to take the advanced placement and go into possibly the sophomore year in college.
But there still are elective courses, aren't
they? They are elective, but
yes, which is the difference from what Senator Benton was saying about that all of them get these. All get, well, family. There's nothing wrong with family relations. Jones.
You asked what subjects we're taking. Well, in English, I'm taking a special course, Great Themes in Literature. That's taught on the college level. I'm taking advanced algebra, and I'll finish with solid geometry. I'm taking physics. I've had chemistry.
Now, that's fine.
term
I'm glad to hear this.
All right, how many
you're an
students in your
unusual high school boy, aren't you?
But how
Not many of your friends are
class?
taking
You see, all these are electives now.
Yes.
I think that it's wrong to give every high school student the chance to select everything, or just about everything, including his course. I think that these kids will pick what has been exposed to them. That's the easier courses. Notice in math and science, you have very few kids going on with these. I think that these ought to be requirements and force these kids to take them.
John, I want our educators to listen to you. You and I agree. I may say that I, as a good Democrat, agree with President Hoover, who in a speech a week or two ago advocated compulsory mathematics right through high school for all children. And the point is a valid point. A child that has taken mathematics all the way through, as John is taking it, holds open his choice until he goes into college as to whether he can become a physicist, a biologist, a doctor, an engineer, for all of which mathematics is required.
Definitely. Let's hear this side before we go out to the audience for questions. Teresa and then Joseph. Yes.
So I definitely agree with John that the fault does lie with the elective system. But science is only one part of education.
Of course.
Yes.
So I
Go
believe
ahead.
that the
Enlarge
solution,
upon that, please.
that the solution to the problem would be in enlarging the basic curricula as a whole, and enlarging arts and humanities also. I meant to ask the Senator before about your trip to Russia. Did you find that all these compulsory mathematics and science, what did they produce in the students? Were they just automatons, or could they think creatively?
Well, you know, Teresa, the Russians don't care. The erosion must be very great. There must be millions of Soviet students who break down under these pressures and go to pieces and end up in the labor camps. But the Russians don't have a system of education as you understand it, as the Catholic Church understands it. You're at a parochial school, aren't you? They don't think of education in that sense. They think of a system of training, let's call it, for the state and for the good of the state. Now, 70% of all their high school graduates go ahead into the college and specialize in science. It's a different problem.
I'm sorry. We have questions from the audience. You want to wait for that, Joseph, or did you want to say something? You wait. All right, let's get our questions from the audience.
My name is Daniel Letty from Augustinian Academy on Staten Island, New York. And Senator Benton, I'd like to know what you think of the idea of allowing a family to deduct from the federal income tax the cost of a college education.
I don't think much of it, because it benefits mostly the people that have got the money anyway. I'm a trustee of 2 colleges and 2 universities, and our students tend to come, by and large, outside the scholarship students, from families that I think can afford to pay the tuition and pay their taxes too. But I want the scholarships given for the needy boys and girls who have the talent.
The young lady.
My name is Helen Rodnight from Franklin K. Lane High School. And Senator, you cited before an example of a student applicant to Yale who had offered courses such as family relations, and you wanted to know whether this person was worthy of a scholarship. Well, I'd like to know, don't you think that though this person may be bright, that he is really too immature to be worthy of a scholarship which would afford him maybe $8,000?
I wouldn't give a scholarship if I were passing out federal money to boys that have taken that kind of training, and I'd make it clear to them if they're on the elective basis in high school, that if they take courses in personality problems, marriage and the family, physical education, typing, etc., they're not going to get a scholarship for college.
Joseph.
Senator Benton, I'd like to ask you, don't you think that this is actually in the educational system itself? Since the college advisors, when you go down, not the college advisors, but faculty advisors, to plan your program, they'll give you something for the next term and do not think far ahead. So when you come up to apply for college, you're more or less stuck with what you have.
Well, this is why I agree with Margaret and also with the spirit of John's remarks that many more of these courses should be made compulsory. I don't believe an average boy of 13, 14, or 15 has enough judgment to make the decision as to whether he should drop mathematics.
Yes, well, the general feeling here is that they select the course that is easiest for them to take.
May I suggest, Mrs. Gordon, that the problem that we're discussing is not only a problem for the bright students, but for all students.
Yes.
If we had smaller classes So a teacher, as in Russia, has only 17 pupils on the average per class.
Yes.
That teacher can then do greater justice to the bright students in the class.
Yes, I think it's 17 is against 37 here.
Well, there's
like
some,
that.
there's some
Yes.
such great
Yes,
margin.
a great margin.
A lot of
Yes.
these problems come back, are we giving all our students a fair chance,
That's right.
not merely bright students a fair chance?
Let's get a question. Hold it, Frank, will you please? Yes.
Marcia Goldberg and I attend Julie Richmond Country School in Manhattan. I should like to know, Mr. Benton, if you think that more high schools should divide students into two groups, the average and the more intelligent, giving the latter a better chance to advance.
This, of course, is a problem for psychologists and educators, but as a parent with 4 children, I don't like it. The average parent doesn't try to split his children into groups when he's bringing them up. And one of these young people made what to me is a very valid point. The brighter students are going to live with the other students and the rest of the population all their lives. I think they'd better get used to living with them as they do in their home right in high school. This doesn't mean, though, that the brighter children shouldn't be given special opportunities for stimulation and advancement. I think they should be allowed to advance at a much more rapid rate, among other benefits, so they can go through school much more quickly, get into college at a younger age. That's a break we ought to stimulate everywhere.
Yes, right.
Mr. Benton, another thing that also would stimulate the brighter students would be greater relationship between the parent, the teacher, and the pupil. And I think in today's public schools, that relationship is not present. In most of the rural schools, small, maybe private schools, there's a great relationship between the three, the teacher, the parent, and the pupil. And I think it tends to keep the pupil alert as far as what subjects it takes. The parent could discuss his problems with the teacher, and the teacher seems to take a personal interest in the welfare of the child as far as education is concerned. Whereas in these public schools where there are so many thousand attending, there are schools with a great number of pupils, there's no relationship like that, and the teacher really doesn't care about the pupil.
Frank has a very good point there, Mrs. Gordon. One of the most interesting experiments now going on in education is right here on Manhattan Island, a special television grant given by the Ford Foundation. And the television programs that are being viewed by the students in the classroom are also available and being viewed by the parents at home. And this gives a common interest in the subject to the parents and to the children. There are other experiments along this same line running today, such as the a great books course running up in Westchester County, where the parents attend with the students and read together the great books and discuss them. I agree thoroughly with Frank's point.
Well, I don't know what to do. I'm sitting here as moderator with hands flying up here and hands up there. I've just, the audience? All right, get a question from the audience.
My name is Ken Norwick. I go to James Monroe High School in the Bronx. I'd like to ask the whole panel what they think, at what grade should the bright student be given science and math, advanced science and math?
This is addressed to the young members of the panel. Well, what do you want to say, John?
Well, as soon as he can take it.
That's a good answer. Well, what age do you think he can take it?
Oh, I suppose that it will depend largely on the individual, but I should think that the 10th and 11th grade should start with advanced math and advanced science.
But elementary science and mathematics in the elementary schools?
Should be given
because
earlier.
when I was in Russia, the children, you remember, 8 and 9-year-old children were being given the first fundamentals of
They start them in Russia
and
on physics and chemistry in the 5th and 6th grades, but not every day. In other words, they'll have, say, a couple of classes of chemistry a week, or a couple of classes in physics a week, when they're 10, 11, 12 years old.
Yes, but then after that they test their ability, and then they separate them into their component parts. Hold it just a minute. There's a question out there. I'll come back to you. Yes.
My name is William Wald. I'm from Long Island City High School. I'd like to know, Senator Benton, if you feel that the honor classes in some schools consist
What classes?
of honor classes, which consist of only the brightest students. If you feel that these schools should hold their classes in a lecture sense, thus giving the college student, the high school student, a better chance when he gets to college to grasp the lectures.
That's just too technical a question for me. You know, if I start shooting my mouth off on some of these technical and detailed questions applied to education, my professional educator friends who are on the faculties of the universities I try to serve are going to take exception to me and tell me...
one of the panel members can take that. Margaret, how do you feel about that?
Well, I think the tendency in education now is to try to get as little of the lecture course as possible. At least in the high schools, I know they limit the lecture classes as much as they can. In college, of course, they find it necessary to have professors teaching 300 to 350 pupils, and that, as far as I know, is not exceptional. But in the high schools, the emphasis should be, I think, on more individual work.
May I make one little comment there, prompted by what Margaret has said? Lectures, I believe, are going to be much more widely used, also television and also motion pictures, in part out of the shortage of teachers, but in part because this is one way to pay teachers more and to give them higher rewards if they can handle more students in bigger classes. But supplementing this wider use of lectures will have to come a system of consultants, tutors, small groups, advisors handling small groups of students.
It's really a renovation of our entire educational system, isn't it? There's a young gentleman.
My name is Thomas Lynch. I'm from Archbishop Malloy High School. Mr. Benton, do you think that if we were more fair to the bright student, that we would still have the capacity to be fair to the average student and the below average student?
Well, this is the problem. The problem of our society is to give every individual the best possible break. We naturally are not going to select the bright students, do things for them, and push them ahead if this, in turn, is disadvantageous to the majority of the students. I believe both things must be kept in sight as a constant goal. And my answer is, therefore, we've got to learn how to push the bright students ahead, stimulate them, give them a better break, but do it for all students as well and at the same time.
Joseph, you wanted to say something.
I think that our educational system is to make a person aware of his later life. And if you can do this by separating the bright student from the below average student, and I believe it'd be very profitable to the below average student as well as to the bright student. Since the below average student in the average class, there's going to be a bright student, an average, and a below average. Now the below average student is going to sit there and he's going to be bored stiff, being envious and everything, and while the bright student will do all the work. Here the below average student will actually have a chance in a class with it's on the same level.
I see. Can we take any more? Oh, time's up, you mean? Oh my, this went so fast I couldn't realize that the time's up.
I congratulate you, Mrs. Gordon. These are bright students.
They are
We've learned a lot from them.
And thank you very much, Senator Bennett.
My privilege to be here, as always.
And also thank the panel and our audience for being with us today. I want to remind our listening audience that study outlines on today's topic are available. Address your comments on the program and also your requests for the study outlines to the New York Times Youth Forums, New York 36, New York. And please stand by. You will be given the topic for next week, which I think you will find very interesting since it leads directly out of this program.
On our next program, high school students will discuss the topic, what place the arts in our nuclear age? The guest will be Abram Chasins, music director, radio station WQXR. Requests for study outlines on topics discussed, for program tickets, and your comments should be addressed to Youth Forums, the New York Times, New York 36.